Right then, today then, so where we are, we're pretty much halfway through attachment now. We've looked at the idea that we have stages that we progress through in terms of attachment. We've looked at learning theory. Do we learn to attach to our caregiver via things like classical and operant conditioning? We've also looked at, what else have we looked at here? Animal studies. So can we generalise from monkeys, from geese, into looking at different ways that we attach? Now, we need to look at one of the most prominent attachment researchers, which is John Bowlby. And the question for this topic or this section is, do we have one primary caregiver who we are really attached to, that forms like all of our a framework for the way that we live our lives? Is that due to having one caregiver? Okay, so a little note to start then about John Bowlby. So most of his research is from an evolutionary perspective. Now, we used to look a lot at evolution in psychology. We used to look at it with aggression, and similarly here. So his is focusing on survival, basically. So it's looking at characteristics of this perspective, and he's took that and developed it further in his research. So the attempt is to explain how changes occur. Each new generation of animals show genetic variation from the previous one, so focusing on Darwin there. These variations are naturally selected because of survival, and they select the main thing they want to keep in that generation to enhance them, to increase survival. And his key bit was an infant who stays with their mother are more likely to survive. So any traits of an attachment like that will be naturally selected and passed on. So in quite a few of the tribal communities, again, this varies, which is a problem. Mother will stay whilst the father goes out to hunt, and that the nurturing side continues there. So a lot of his research is from that perspective, which will become clearer when we move forward. So a question you can discuss with yourself is, how does this differ to our learning approach that we looked at last time? Why is this different, or how is this different? Key words then that we need for this section. We've got a social releaser. Okay, so this is key AO1 terminology, social releaser. And this is essentially any sort of social behaviour or characteristic that elicits a caregiver response. So things like crying, things like cooing, Google cooing if you don't know what that is. That is a social releaser. That is emitting a response from the caregiver, helping to develop attachment further. The critical period then, he argued, was really important in developing attachment. And this is biologically determined. It's a period of time between 6 months and 2 years, which are the most important time in an infant's life to develop psychologically healthily. So characteristics develop, and he basically argued that once this critical period was over, attachment types can't form. It affects your friendships, your intimate relationships, how you interact with people. Part of it is quite interesting in terms of, sometimes we can see individuals who maybe don't have that strong of a bond with their parents and how that can affect them. But in others, when we look at people who are adopted and fostered, how actually, if you're in a household where you have two parents that are securely attached, that can change. So it is something to be mindful of. The internal working model is a very important part of Bowlby's research, which is a framework. So we call it a mental framework that enables individuals to predict and control their environment. So think of it like a bit like a schema. So you have a framework of what a relationship should look like based on your upbringing, based on your parents' attachment. So if you have a really loving home life where there's communication, there's trust, then when you're older, it's going to predict what you will be like in a relationship. It works as a model for what people expect when they are older. Then, where are we here? Sorry. The continuity hypothesis. Links to that. So the idea that emotionally secure individuals go on to be emotionally secure, trusting, confident adults because it's all they've known, because it's what they've been used to, it's what they've seen. So that makes it easier for them to sort of carry that on. And then lastly, monotropy. So the monotropic theory, what that is you have one relationship, primary attachment figure, and it has a special significance on emotional development. So he was very prominent and very key on the mother being the primary attachment figure. Didn't really talk much about the dad. His focus was mum staying at home for the first 2 years of life to really make sure that they are developing that bond with the child. So he would have been totally against nursery and childcare because you're not developing those bonds. They might develop it with somebody else. Okay, so make sure you've got those notes for each of those key terms. They're really important AO1 for this section. So when we go through the theory, I've attached something that you can make notes on, or you can just make notes in your own book. Entirely up to you. There he is, the hunk of a man, John Bowlby, the major sexist. He worked as a psychiatrist in London, and he did lots of research on thieves and people who are like juvenile criminals, because he wanted to see whether or not those criminals had a mother figure in their life. So he was raised by a nanny, which sparked his interest into attachment. And he looked at emotionally disturbed children. He looked at juveniles, observed a number of children in their wherever they were, foster home, adoptive home, to see the impact that early separation had on their development, on their upbringing and their attachment style. And came up, which we'll look at in 2-3 lessons time, maternal deprivation. So we look at him twice in attachment. He's got a monotropic theory, which is this, and he's got an idea of maternal deprivation. So two sort of similar but are separate theories. So maternal deprivation, what it actually is not having that strong attachment figure from birth. So children should experience a warm, intimate, continuous relationship with the mother or mother substitute in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment. So the key here is that one figure. Like we said, the continuity hypothesis, if they're strongly attached, they go on to be more competent emotionally, socially, not struggle with any difficulties later in life. And he believed that this is innate, it's biological, and it's a variation that's been selected through evolution for survival. So we need to attach to one individual for protection. If you didn't, you're less protected, you're prone to, being killed. So it is something that has developed over time. Okay, I do agree with that. Evolutionary psychology is very, very interesting. If you ever get a minute, go away and have a look at some of the key ideas, especially in relationships. Some of it's quite sexist, I think, and we've moved on quite a way, but it still does have some prominence in psychology. Innate, what that means, just within us, biological. And like we looked at right at the start with caregiver-infant interactions, reciprocity, interactional synchrony, the two-way relationship is key here. So it can't just be the child needing the infant. It has to be the parents, having that bond. It has to be two-way. You can see things that we apply it to postpartum psychosis or postpartum depression. They just don't feel that connection. That can really hinder on that child, Bowlby would argue, for the child's survival, emotionally, physically, psychologically. Parents who look after their offspring are likely to produce subsequent generations. They like to have more children because they develop this bond. It's apparently, ask your parents, apparently the best thing ever to have a child and bring it up to be, this little version of you, I guess. Although really expensive and hormones really nice. So attachments then, how do they form? So again, feel free to pause me at any time and make the notes whilst I discuss through them. I'm worried that I speak too fast and don't really give you enough time, but pause it at any point. So how do they form? So he argues that babies have got this innate, this biological drive to become attached. They want to attach to their caregiver because it benefits them. So a special critical period, so about 3 to 6 months. And he's arguing if no attachment is made within that time, they're going to struggle later in life, whether that be with friendships, bullying, any intimate romantic relationships. In general, they're just not going to be socially competent. Social releases are incredibly important. So it's basically getting the attention of the caregiver. So crying, smiling, cooing, anything that's emitting a social response are mechanisms to help develop how attachments develop and form. Okay, they're very clever babies. They'll smile at you because they know that they're going to get a response from you, they're going to get attention. That's why it's really difficult for parents to leave a child to cry at night so they self-soothe, because those social releases are there to bond them. But sometimes, a bit of learning theory can take place there. They learn, if I cry, I get attention, I get this, I get that. So it must be quite a difficult thing to manage. Then over time, that monotropy, so that one special emotional bond, starts to take place. Often with the mother, he would argue, because when this theory was developed in the 60s, men were still the breadwinners, women were still at home. So there's quite a lot of research to go against this now. We've got loads of stay-at-home dads now. What was the figure? Oh, I can't remember. There is a statistic though that we looked at. Then he's arguing this internal working model can then be developed. So that mental representation of all relationships are based on your early attachment. So if you've got a very loving, caring mother, you're really close to her, you then develop that when you get older. So it sticks with you, is what he's arguing. I have to apologise, I have a bit of a cold, so I'm a bit sniffy. So like we said, it's a representation, this internal working model, a template and mental framework as to what relationships look like. So hopefully you can start to think of some problems with this monotropic theory. I've just put some broad ideas there. What you might want to do before you look at the evaluation is think about how you would mind map these out. So maybe put them on a flashcard or a bit of A3 or a bit of A4. Is attachment adaptive? What other explanations have we got, i.e. learning theory, that we could use to critique this? Multiple attachment, could Schaefer and Emerson come in here to go against this idea? Critical period, is it definitely a thing? Does it definitely have to happen at that time? And then what research do we have to support or to reject this theory? So I've mentioned a few already. Schaefer and Emerson completely go against this. There's a load of multiple attachments in a child's life. So maybe map them out. Maybe think before you look at the evaluation what you could talk about. And then I've kind of got some here that we can talk through. So do that first before you look at this. So the critical period. It's actually a sensitive period in a child's life. So like we know, individual differences are critical in psychology, and they play a massive role in why some individuals, why some children attach earlier or attach later. It just depends on the child. You can't test the critical period. It's based on assumptions that it exists. We can't go away and set it up in a lab and see whether or not it's a thing. So that makes it a problem. We can definitely use Schaefer and Emerson here. So remember our Glaswegian study. Is it really monotropy? Because by 18 months, 13% of children attached to only one person, and a minority appeared to form multiple attachments to grandparents, to siblings, to fathers at the same time. So it's not necessarily that they have one primary caregiver. For some, maybe, but for others, they have multiple. Again, that depends on upbringing, depends on parenting. So I don't think we can say there's one caregiver that's really important, because this completely goes against that. Bailey then, so a nice bit of research on the internal working model. 99 mothers with 1-year-old babies looking at the quality of attachment to their own mothers. So they asked the mums, right, how good was your upbringing? How close were you with your own mum? Through an interview procedure. Assess attachment of babies by observations. They get them to do a variety of tasks to assess how attached the children are to those 99 mothers. Those who said, I had poor attachment, wasn't that close to my parents, more likely to have children who weren't attached to them. So maybe they struggled seeing a parent as a safe base or didn't want to interact with them. We can pick out some methodological evaluation points with Bailey. We can say, okay, so we're looking at a standard interview. Any sort of face-to-face interview, asking people quite personal questions about their upbringing. I wouldn't say ethics, I'd say demand characteristics. You're going to lie, aren't you? You're not going to be like, do you know what, I hate my mum. You're going to be like, yeah, it was okay. We had, some ups and downs. So you're not really going to get a very valid representation here. Through observation again, demand characteristic would be the Hawthorne effect here. So they're going to change their behaviour because they don't want to look like a poor parent. Then this idea of social releases, let's take that off actually, the cooing, the crying, the smiling. Brazelton observed mothers and babies during interactions, reported interactional synchrony, so going right back to the start of attachment. Extended the observations to a given experiment. Remember that? If you've Googled that research, do it. It's quite a sad bit of research to watch, actually. Ask them, okay, do not look at your baby, look at your baby, but do not respond to any signals. Have a really blank face. When they're crying, when they're smiling, you don't do anything. The baby shows some distress, obviously, but eventually they curled up and led motionless because they needed that social connection with their caregiver. Okay, so that's quite an interesting bit of research on social releases, that it is a thing. So it adds validity to that idea. Monotropy is really socially sensitive. So ethically speaking, it's quite tricky to look at the idea that you have one caregiver that is a mum. The implications for the mother's lifestyle choices, so they want to go to work, Bowlby would be really angry, maybe angry, would be quite prejudiced against them because they're risking their child not attaching properly, which, that's in this day and age, you'd probably get shot if you said, mum has to stay at home. And rightly so. We all have a choice. Temperament is quite interesting here. Might be just as important as attachment. So temperament is basically personality. So some babies are more anxious. It could be genetic. Some are more sociable. So it could explain later social behaviour rather than attachment. So it might not be they have a terrible relationship with mum. It could be that they're just quite an anxious baby. It could explain why some have more separation anxiety compared to others. There's a few that you can pick out. You've now looked at 2 different explanations as to why children form attachments. Have a look at this sheet because it's so easy to get learning theory and Bowlby confused. So you've got a variety of statements. Give one a circle. Is it learning? Is it Bowlby? Then I have the answer on the next slide. But pause this. Do it. It is for your benefit. Don't just doss through it. Then I've got a question for you to answer. Bit of AO2 application. This would probably be about 6 marks. Ronald, a single father, employs a nanny to look after his daughter Olivia. Olivia's nanny spends more time with her than her father does and provides most of her meals. On the other hand, Ronald spends as much time as he can playing with Olivia. Ronald is pleasantly surprised to find that he is Olivia's main attachment type. Discuss with your partner why Ronald might expect Olivia to attach to her nanny and why in fact she attached to him. So don't discuss it with your partner. Write down Why might Ronald expect Olivia to attach to the nanny, and why is she attached to him? So bringing in all those key terms: social releases, critical period, monotropic theory, to really bulk up that response. Then best thing to do, 2 explanations here. Do like a comparison between them. They love those types of questions. So explanations of why people attach. Compare Bowlby to learning theory and contrast it. It's a nice bit of extra stuff to round off.